Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all you Sip&Talkers out there, wherever you are. Welcome back. I just flew back from D.C., and I have to say, the mood over there is interesting.
Oh, yeah. Regarding the whole legislative mess in Taiwan, what are the folks in the think tank saying?
Well, it's less concern and more just reconfusion. I heard someone use this analogy, and it stuck with me. They said, it's like being in a burning house.
And arguing over the brand of fire extinguisher to buy?
Exactly. That's the one. The threat is right there, the need is urgent, but everyone's just stuck on, procedure and details.
That sounds about right. From the outside, it must look totally baffling.
It is, because the logic in Washington is very, very direct. It's an American kind of realist logic, and it's blunt. They basically say, look, if you yourself are not planning to buy insurance, why on earth should the insurance company pay out for you?
Wow. That is a heavy way to put it. But I get it. Inside Taiwan, of course, the argument is all about procedure and making sure everything is done by the book.
And I understand that. I really do. But from that international perspective, this 1.25 trillion new Taiwan dollar special budget, we're talking about 40 billion US dollars. It's just so much more than a weapons purchase. It's being seen as a resolution index.
A what now?
A resolution index. It's basically a sign of your commitment to defend yourself. When the whole world is watching, how fast you push this through speaks way louder than any press release.
Okay, so I think that's what we need to get into today. At the request of so many of you listening in Taiwan, we're going to try and break this down in the clearest way possible. We're going to look at where exactly Taiwan's national defense is stuck.
And we have to talk about that story we were chatting about before, the tea merchant who won a defense contract. Because it turns out there's a whole backstory there that kind of explains, well, everything. All right, let's get into it. Today on Sip and Talk, refusing the Hedgehog strategy. Does Taiwan really want to defend itself? So let's start with that massive number, 1.25 trillion TWD. It's about 40 billion US dollars. And this isn't the regular annual defense budget, right?
Not at all. This is a special budget spread out over several years. It's specifically for accelerating Taiwan's asymmetrical capabilities.
The whole porcupine or hedgehog strategy stuff, making the islands too prickly and painful to attack.
Exactly. So the size of it and what it's for sends a huge signal to the international community. But the frustration in D.C. isn't really about the money, it's about the speed. Or, I guess, the lack of speed.
Which brings us back to that insurance idea. It's based on something called the self-help theory.
Right, the SHE. It's a pretty foundational idea in international relations.
Yeah, it basically says that in the grand scheme of things, every country is on its own. You are fundamentally responsible for your own survival.
So if a nation is facing an existential threat and it doesn't seem to be prioritizing its own defense, not getting the public on board, not spending the money, not acting efficiently, then why should an ally like the U.S. risk its own soldiers and resources to step in?
It's the ultimate skin in the game argument, isn't it? If the insurance company sees you arguing about the color of the fire escape while the basement is on fire, they're going to start having second thoughts.
And this delay, this legislative gridlock, it just signals total policy chaos. It makes allies nervous. And the warnings from D.C. have been anything but subtle. We've heard former defense officials spell it out. The math is simple. You are stronger. You are safer. You are weaker. You are more dangerous. A well-funded, prepared Taiwan is a deterrent. It makes the whole region more stable, which is in America's interest. A Taiwan that looks divided and unprepared, well, that does the opposite.
It ties directly into what people like the former AIT director Raymond Green have said. It becomes an issue of politics back home in the States. How do you convince the American taxpayer to support this?
It's a tough sell.
A really tough sell. How do you go to someone in Ohio or Florida and say, we need to risk American lives to protect a country that can't even get its act together to fund its own defense? That's a brutal question, and the excuses about procedure just don't cut it.
So the perception becomes that Taiwanese politicians are using national security as a bargaining chip for their own domestic squabbles.
Which is just a terrible look. It looks like internal politics is more important than national survival.
Yeah.
Devastating.
And what makes this all so much worse is the timeline. The military reality. Everyone keeps talking about this key defense window.
Yeah, centered around the year 2026. Why that year specifically? It's not just a random date, is it?
No, not at all. It's driven by some very real, very hard deadlines. It's about procurement lead times, mainly. The weapons Taiwan needs for this asymmetrical strategy, things like advanced mobile anti-ship missiles, fast mine-laying ships, hardened command centers. You can't just buy these off the shelf.
There's a production line, a queue.
A very long queue. And these are often custom built. If this $40 billion budget is stuck in a procedural committee for 6 months or a year, Taiwan loses its spot in the production line for things like Harpoon missiles or HIMARS rocket systems.
So a delay isn't just a political delay. It's a physical delay in getting the actual hardware, the actual deterrence in place. And it could be delayed by years.
By years. Potentially pushing delivery past that critical 2026 window, when many analysts think Beijing might feel its most confident.
So when this defense bill gets blocked from even entering the committee for a real debate, which is what's happening, the world doesn't see strict supervision. They just don't.
They see paralysis. They see unpreparedness.
Exactly. They expect to see a nation under threat showing unity and speed on core defense. But the gridlock? It projects the total opposite.
And that creates this perception of vulnerability, which, as those officials warned, is actually more dangerous. It might invite a miscalculation from across the strait because they might see the internal division and think, oh, they'll just fold.
Okay, but that's the international view, and it kind of misses the really complicated internal fight that's going on.
Right. Inside Taiwan, it's a society dealing with this massive contradiction. People are very, very aware of the military threat. You can't not be, especially after those big encircling drills in 2025.
But they're also deeply skeptical about the solutions being offered.
It's a classic case of cognitive dissonance. The public accepts the threat is real, but they have zero trust that the government can spend $40 billion effectively. They think it's either going to be wasted or it's going to drain money from, hospitals and schools. So let's break down those two sides. First, argument A, the side that says defense has to be the #1 priority. And the polling data actually shows pretty strong support for this. It's surprisingly robust. You look at surveys from 2025, 2026, and they consistently show over half the population supports increasing the defense budget. 51% in one poll, almost 50% in another. And get this, 44% favor a substantial increase, not just a small bump.
And that's because they're skeptical about the current situation, right? I saw a number that said something like 65% of the public doubts Taiwan's current ability to defend itself.
That's the one. And you pair that with over 61% believing that Chinese infiltration is a severe problem. So for a lot of people, the spending isn't a provocation. It's just a common sense insurance policy. An expensive one, but a necessary one.
And the government has been trying to signal this commitment, setting these really ambitious goals. They want to hit 3.3% of GDP for defense by 2026, and then maybe even 5% by 2030. That's a huge shift for the economy.
It is, and you hear it in the diplomatic messaging. The foreign minister, Joseph Wu, has been very clear, saying surrender is never an option. The argument is that spending over 20% of the entire government budget on defense proves their resolve.
And this is getting applause internationally, which kind of reinforces their position. You've got U.S. representatives like Don Bacon saying, this is the best way to avoid a war, deterrence.
So that's the pro-spending argument. But now we have to flip to argument B, which is all about the deep fiscal and structural doubts. This is what's really fueling the opposition in the legislature.
Yeah, because even though a majority supports some kind of increase, there's this huge hesitation, and it seems to boil down to trust, or lack thereof.
There's a real disconnect. You have polls showing 51% support the budget increase, but at the same time, 60% say they are unwilling to actually fight in a war.
It's a wild statistic.
It is. And that 65% number, the doubt in the current defense capacity, it just hangs over everything. It makes people feel like they're being asked to pour money into a leaky bucket.
And that leaky bucket analogy is perfect because this is where the money pressure really kicks in. Taiwan's total government spending as a share of its economy is actually pretty low, right? Around 18% of GDP.
Very low for a developed economy. So if you start pushing defense spending up towards, say, 10% of that total government pie, it creates an enormous squeeze on everything else.
On what specifically? Social services, education budgets, healthcare, pensions, infrastructure. It forces a really brutal choice on the public. Do you want more missiles or do you want new hospitals, more soldiers or better schools? And if you don't trust the military in the first place, that becomes a very easy question to answer. And that skepticism, it's not coming from nowhere. There are these deep structural problems people see. Critics keep pointing to what they call a severe manpower crisis.
The Army's active duty numbers have reportedly fallen off a cliff from something like 300,000 down to just 100,000. So the question becomes, What's the point of buying $40 billion of high-tech gear if you don't have enough trained people to operate and maintain it?
And then you get these anecdotes that just crystallize all the public doubt, like that Kuma Academy thing.
That was a PR disaster.
It was supposed to be this program to get reservists trained up quickly, but the narrative that took hold, whether it was totally fair or not, was that they were only being taught things like first aid and gardening.
And that's politically toxic. It doesn't matter if 99% of the training is serious military drills. That 1% perception of gardening just destroys public faith. It fuels the opposition's entire argument. Why fund a military that doesn't seem to take training seriously?
This then leads directly into the criticism over what's actually being bought. The opposition worries that buying these big, expensive, traditional platforms like large Navy ships or certain jets is a waste of money.
Because they're seen as easy targets for Beijing's overwhelming missile advantage. The argument is that this kind of spending could actually make Taiwan less safe by provoking a fight it can't win. It's provocation without strength.
And this feeds into the cold, hard, realist counter-argument. Even if Taiwan spent a crazy amount, say 25% of its GDP on defense, it still can't match China's military budget. China's economy is, what, 22 times larger?
Something like that. So the critics say pursuing an arms race is basically suicidal resistance. They argue that diplomacy and political dialogue have to be prioritized over a military buildup that you can't possibly win.
So the core argument from the opposition isn't that the threat is fake. It's that just throwing $40 billion at the problem is a lazy solution that avoids the really hard questions.
Exactly. They're saying you have to fix military readiness, you have to solve the manpower crisis, and you have to have an honest talk about the economic trade-offs before you write this massive check. And it's this fundamental lack of trust that's being weaponized in the legislature.
Okay, so that internal conflict explains the why. Now we have to get into the how. How is this budget actually being stopped? It gets into some legislative jargon, which can be confusing.
It can be, but you have to understand it to see what's really happening. All this talk of sending a bill to committee or the procedure committee, It sounds like boring administrative stuff.
But it's not. This is where the fight is. This is a perfect example of something we're calling vetocracy, extreme veto politics. We see it paralyzing our own Congress in the U.S., and it's operating with brutal efficiency in Taiwan right now.
Vetocracy. I like that. It's when the whole point of politics isn't to build things, but just to stop your opponent from building things.
Precisely. Your success isn't measured by what you accomplish. It's measured by successfully stopping the other side from accomplishing anything. Government becomes this zero-sum game of political hostage-taking.
And the weapon of choice in this vetocracy is the procedure committee. We need to be really clear about what that committee is supposed to do and what it's become.
Right. In a normal functioning system, the procedure committee is basically the legislative class scheduler. Its job is to check if a bill is formatted correctly and then put it on a calendar for the real experts, like the Defense Committee, to actually debate it.
But it's morphed into this incredibly powerful political security gate. And that gatekeeper can deny entry to a bill just because they don't like it politically. They can just vote to not even schedule it for a debate.
And that is the heart of the deadlock.
Yeah.
This $1.25 trillion special act has been blocked 6 times as of early 2026. 6 times. Yeah. And because the procedure committee won't schedule it, it can't move to the Defense Committee. There's no debate, no public record, nothing.
Which is so damaging because that's where the public is supposed to get information. That's where you see officials getting cross-examined about costs and timelines.
Yeah.
The whole accountability function is just dead on arrival. And then there's the second problem, which is a perfect example of vetocracy in action. The packaging deadlock. This is just straight-up legislative blackmail. You take a critical, urgent national security bill, the defense budget, and you hold it hostage over something completely unrelated.
Like what? Give me an example.
Maybe military pay raises or a fight over pension funding. The opposition basically says, we will block this crucial defense money unless you give us what we want on this other unrelated issue.
It just destroys the whole idea of independent policymaking. I mean, we see bargaining in the U.S. Congress. They call it log rolling. But it's really rare for a critical national security budget to be held up this long over procedural games. There's usually a consensus that you don't mess with that. But that consensus is broken down. Which leads to the third and honestly the most cynical problem. The total disappearance of accountability. The blame game. To really get how stuck this is, you have to understand the 8 checkpoints that a special budget has to go through. It's a marathon. It follows the principle of law first, then money. So you can't spend the money until you have a law that authorizes you to spend it. Makes sense.
Right. So phase one is just passing the mother law, the special act. This is what creates the legal authority to borrow and spend that $40 billion. And this phase alone has 4 steps. Step 1 is the procedure committee scheduling the bill.
Which is where we are stuck right now.
Stuck at step 1 of 8. If it ever gets past that, step 2 is the defense committee debating the principle of the law. Steps 3 and 4 are the final votes to pass the mother law. Only when all 4 of those are done is the legal framework in place.
So all this political drama is happening before they've even started talking about the actual money.
Exactly. If phase 1 ever passes, then you start phase 2, debating the special budget itself. This is where they're supposed to scrutinize the dollars and cents. And it involves another trip through the procedure committee and then finally the deep dive in the subject committee. Step 6. That sounds like where the real democratic oversight is supposed to happen. That's where the opposition could really grill the ministers on unit costs, on timelines, on everything. And considering special budgets are now like 20 to 30% of all defense spending, that oversight is critical. But even after that, there are 2 more final votes where the budget can be cut or changed.
This all boils down to this one fundamental tension, doesn't it? Is sending the bill to committee is it a green light for oversight, or is it signing a blank check? That's the entire debate in a nutshell. The government side says it's obviously the green light. Their logic is simple. If you think there's corruption, you have to let the bill into the committee. That's the only place you have the power to demand documents and question ministers on the record. Blocking it isn't oversight. It's just paralysis. It's like saying, we can't fix the car if you won't even let us tow it into the garage to look at the engine.
Perfect analogy. But the opposition sees it as a blank check. Their fear is real, and it's fiscal. They worry that once that mother law from phase 1 is passed, it's irreversible, because special budgets are legally designed to bypass the normal rules, including the national debt ceiling.
Okay. So the fear is that once that law is passed, the government has the legal right to borrow a huge amount of money, creating this potential financial black hole. And even if you cut the budget later in phase 2, the authority to borrow that money is still there.
Precisely. And this isn't just some abstract fear. There was data from the Ministry of Finance in late 2025 that showed borrowing for these special budgets was already getting dangerously close to the national debt warning line. So the opposition has a legitimate fiscal argument. They're worried about maxing out the nation's credit card.
So the whole standoff is happening at the wrong stage. The ruling party needs the security funding now. The opposition is using the very first procedural step as leverage to get guarantees on transparency and to raise these very real concerns about national debt. But the result is total gridlock at the front gate.
And that gridlock needs political fuel to keep going. It needs a story that everyone can understand, and that's where the tea merchant comes in.
I am still trying to wrap my head around this story. It is just so bizarre. The Hong Zhang tea leaf case. Lay out the facts for us, because they are just incredible.
They are. Okay, so there's a company in Kaohsiung. Its registered name is Hong Zhang Tea Leaf. Its registered capital is 100,000 TWD. That's about $3,000 US.
So a tiny, tiny company.
Microscopic. Yet this company, Tea Leaf, somehow wins multiple government contracts for highly sensitive defense services.
And again, just to be crystal clear, they weren't selling tea to the military cafeteria.
No. They won contracts for IT services, server maintenance, and cybersecurity for the Navy and the Ministry of National Defense. Over 5 years, they got something like 16 contracts worth around 18 million TWD, which is almost 600,000 US.
It's the optics of it. A company named Tea Leaf, with $3,000 in the bank, has access to naval servers.
Yeah.
It just creates this instant credibility crisis with the public. How is that even possible?
Well, the Defense Ministry had to try and explain it. And legally, their explanation is, well, it's complicated. They said it's because the Government Procurement Act has really low bars for what they call non-core IT services.
So for smaller contracts, you don't have to be a major defense contractor.
Basically, no. The company just has to be legally registered and have the right business items on its registration. The ministry claimed that Tea Leaf later added IT services to its registration. And, get this, they claimed their staff had hundreds of professional IT certifications. They insisted the tea business was just a, quote, side hobby.
So the official line was, hey, as long as they do the job and their paperwork is in order, we don't care if the company is called Joe's Pizza Place. It's a classic bureaucratic response.
It is. But the red flags were just everywhere. The tiny capital alone is a security risk. A small company like that is so much more vulnerable to being compromised. And then you had the guy at the center of it all.
A former owner.
Yeah. He had this controversial past, allegations of forgery, had been banned from government bids before, and he was reportedly rehired by the company as just a regular employee and was allowed to go into military bases to do maintenance work.
That's insane.
The ministry admitted he was supervised, but the idea that this guy had physical access to military computer rooms, I mean, for the opposition, that was a political goldmine.
The blue camp, the opposition, they must have jumped all over this.
Instantly. They held it up as absolute proof. Proof of systemic corruption, of massive security holes, and most importantly, proof that this government cannot be trusted with a $1.25 trillion blank check.
And it wasn't just this one story, was it? There were others.
No, they managed to find a few other examples of these non-typical vendors. A shoe company winning a contract for military fuses. A home renovation company bidding on handling explosives. It created this broader narrative that the whole procurement system was unprofessional and deeply flawed.
So this tea merchant story, it's the political justification for the entire legislative blockade. It solidifies the opposition's demand.
Exactly. It lets them say, you want us to pass this mother law. You want the authority to borrow $40 billion. Then first, you have to give us total transparency on what went wrong in the past and guarantee it won't happen again. The tea merchant didn't legally block the bill. The procedure committee did. But the story gave them the political cover they needed to do it 6 times.
So it's a crisis of procedure that's really being fueled by a much deeper crisis of trust.
That's it, exactly.
You know, this whole thing we've been breaking down what's happening in Taiwan's legislature. It's not some unique phenomenon. In Washington, this is old news. And it hit me when I was watching this analysis of why our own U.S. Congress is so divided.
What was the takeaway? It pointed to one core problem. When party interest gets put above national governance, your system collapses into vetocracy. And the logic is exactly what we've been talking about. My success isn't what I build, it's what I successfully stop you from building. It's institutionalized chaos.
That is so ironic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We all think we're exercising supervision, but in reality, everyone is just pulling in opposite directions. It's mutual paralysis. And if we're using our own hedgehog shell, our defense, as a political bargaining chip, who is going to care about which committee blocked the budget when a real threat finally shows up?
Exactly. And the international community is watching all of this. When we talk about whether allies should help Taiwan, the first assumption is that Taiwan is a functionally normal democracy, not a chaotic mess where you can't even get a budget bill through the front door for a discussion.
So for everyone listening, after this whole budget marathon we've walked through, the point isn't to pick a side and just blame one party. The hope is that you can see through this chaotic logic to take back the conversation that's been hijacked by all this political jargon. Only when people start demanding the politicians stop the vetoing and start the dialogue, only then can these government machines, whether it's in Taiwan or the U.S. or any democracy, start moving again. At the end of the day, what Taiwan is missing most right now isn't budget, it's trust. And if the legislature keeps using procedure as a tool for political revenge, people's faith in democracy itself is going to crumble. I think for people to get involved, they first have to see through these procedural games. So the next time you see a news report or some influencer saying the budget is stuck and it's all their fault, the question to ask isn't just who's blaming who. The real question is, why won't you let everyone see the content? That's it. Let it into the committee. Democracy isn't just about voting every few years. It's about having the right to examine these budgets out in the sunlight. If you like this discussion, we'll keep trying to break down these complex issues.
We will. And on that note, please don't forget to subscribe to the Sip and Talk podcast and also give a shout out to our good friend Mickey and his YouTube channel, Mickey to Life.
Oh, yeah. Mickey's vlogs from his European conquest journey are really consistent now. Looks like he's really gotten back on his feet. So let's all keep pushing forward. We'll see you next time.